I found out my husband has been living a double life with another family, and now he's demanding I help him financially support his other wife and kids, or he'll leave me broke. I can explain everything, but first, you need to hear me out." Those were the words my husband, Mark, 39M, said to me as I stared at the photos spread across the kitchen table. My mind raced, barely able to process what I was looking at. Photos of Mark with another woman and 3 kids, kids who called him Dad. A family I had never known about, a life he had been hiding from me for years. It all started 3 days ago when I got a call from an unfamiliar number. At first, I let it go to voicemail, thinking it was just another spam call, but they called again. And then again. Finally, I picked up, expecting a telemarketer, only to hear a woman's voice on the other end, sounding strained and angry. "Is this Sarah?" she asked, her voice dripping with tension. "Yes, who's asking?" I replied, thrown off by her tone. "My name is Lynn," she said. "I'm Mark's wife." The words hit me like a freight train, and I could barely hold the phone. I wanted to hang up, to convince myself that this was some kind of twisted prank. But her voice was steady, cold, and filled with conviction. "Listen, Sarah," she continued, her tone sharp. "I didn't know about you either, but we need to talk." I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding, my mind spinning as I tried to wrap my head around what she was saying. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper. "How long have you?" 10 years, she said, cutting me off. "We have 3 kids together, and it seems you've been with him for 6 years, right?" My throat felt dry, and I could barely get the words out. "Yes." Lynn sighed on the other end of the line, and her voice softened just slightly. "Then you understand why I'm calling. I had no idea about you, and I doubt you knew about me. But it's time we both get answers." She was right. If there was any hope of making sense of this, I needed to hear the truth from Mark. I agreed to meet Lynn the following day, my heart pounding as I tried to steel myself for whatever was coming. I wasn't prepared for any of it. The next day, Lynn and I met at a small coffee shop halfway between her town and ours. She was in her mid-30s, with tired eyes and an air of resolve that only deepened the shock I felt. She laid out the photos on the table, photos she had taken after she first suspected Mark was hiding something from her. Photos of him entering my house. Photos of him laughing with me at a local park. Photos of him and me holding hands as we'd walk down the street, completely oblivious to the web of lies he had spun around us. "Did he ever mention me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a hint of betrayal hidden beneath her calm exterior. I shook my head, tears filling my eyes. Not once. We sat in silence for a few moments, each processing our own version of the truth, before she spoke again. "I think we both deserve answers. We need to confront him together." Later that evening, as I sat in our kitchen waiting for Mark to come home, my mind raced with anger, fear, and disbelief. This man, my husband, had been lying to me for years. The man I thought I knew, the man I loved, had an entirely separate family. And for what? To keep us both in the dark, to live 2 lives at once. How could he do something so cruel? When he finally walked through the door, he looked at me with confusion, probably noticing the tension in my posture. I didn't wait for him to speak. "Sit down, Mark," I said, my voice cold. "We need to talk." He hesitated, but something in my tone must have told him not to argue. He sat across from me, his face cautious, but he said nothing. I took a deep breath, gathering my strength. "I got a call today from a woman named Lynn. She says she's your wife." Mark's face paled, and for a moment he looked like he might deny it. But then he sighed, dropping his head into his hands. "Sarah, I didn't want you to find out like this." "Find out what?" I asked, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "That you've been lying to me for our entire marriage. That you have a whole other family." He looked up, his eyes filled with regret. "Yes, I know this sounds insane, but I've been managing both lives as best as I could. I never wanted to hurt either of you." The absurdity of his words struck me, and I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. "Hurt us? You've been lying, deceiving, and manipulating both of us. Did you really think we'd never find out?" He shifted in his seat, his face tightening with frustration. Look, I know it's wrong, but I love both of you. I've tried to keep everyone happy. By lying to us? I interrupted, barely able to contain the rage bubbling up inside me. How can you possibly think that's love? He was silent for a long moment, and then his expression shifted, turning cold. I'm not here to debate what's right and wrong, Sarah. This is the situation, and now we have to deal with it. My stomach turned as he continued, his tone practical, almost emotionless. Both families need my financial support. Lynn's struggling to keep up with the bills, and with the kids' expenses, I need to be able to help her. I need you to start contributing more so that I can support both families. I felt my world tilt, unable to believe what I was hearing. You want me to support you in taking care of another family? He nodded, his eyes hardening. Yes, Sarah, if you don't, I'm leaving. I'll take everything we have together, and you'll be left with nothing. You know the accounts are in my name, and I've spoken with a lawyer. If we divorce, I'll make sure you're left with as little as possible. I stared at him, my chest tight with disbelief and betrayal. So what, you're blackmailing me now? He didn't flinch. I'm giving you a choice. Either you help me support them, or you walk away and lose everything. That's the reality. The man I was looking at felt like a stranger, and for the first time I saw him clearly, not the man I'd fallen in love with, but someone who was willing to sacrifice anything, anyone, to keep his twisted life together. My hands trembled as I stood up, unable to sit across from him any longer. This isn't a marriage, Mark. This is a lie. And if you think you can blackmail me into staying, you don't know me at all. He watched me, his gaze unflinching, and I realized he wasn't going to change. He would do whatever it took to protect himself, no matter who he hurt along the way. As I left the room, the reality sank in. Mark was willing to break me, financially and emotionally, to maintain his double life. But I wasn't going to let him control me any longer. He might think he held all the cards, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to go down without a fight. The days after Mark's ultimatum felt like walking through a fog. My husband, a man I'd trusted, built a life with, had demanded that I help him financially support his other family, using the threat of financial ruin as leverage. The weight of betrayal was crushing, but beneath it, something stronger was starting to take hold. He may have shocked me into silence that night, but I knew that I couldn't let him control my life any longer. Still, I needed to be smart about this. Mark had always handled our finances, and while I wasn't completely in the dark, he'd made sure the accounts and investments were in his name. If I wanted a chance at a future without him, I needed to understand exactly where things stood. The following day, I reached out to my close friend Maya, 36F, someone I could trust with my darkest secrets. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes and ears. As soon as I told her about Mark's double life, her eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God, Sarah," she whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I can't believe he'd do something like that. A whole other family. And now he's threatening you." I nodded, feeling both anger and exhaustion well up inside me. "He's put me in a corner, Maya. Either I help him, or he makes sure I end up with nothing if I leave." Maya's face hardened. "No, that's not how this ends. You need a lawyer, someone who can help you figure out how to protect yourself and your money." Her words ignited a spark of hope. She was right. I wasn't powerless. I had options, and if I wanted to be free, I needed to start fighting back. Maya recommended a family law attorney she knew, Carolyn Peters, 52F, who specialized in complex divorces. I called her the next day and arranged a consultation. Just making the appointment felt like a small victory, a step toward taking back control of my life. When I met Carolyn later that week, her office was a sanctuary of calm professionalism, filled with shelves of thick law books and family photos. She listened intently as I explained the entire situation, her expression shifting from concern to a look of quiet determination. "Sarah," she began, leaning forward, "Mark's threat is serious, but it's also his attempt to keep you under control. If he's living a double life, we can use that against him. Legally, he's responsible for his actions. If he's been misusing marital funds, he's actually in breach of marital contract. That means he's putting himself at risk, not you." Her words filled me with cautious optimism. "But what about the accounts?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He has everything in his name. He could clean us out before I even get a chance to secure anything." Carolyn nodded. "That's a valid concern, but there are legal protections we can put in place to stop him. For one, we can file a financial restraining order that would freeze your joint assets and prevent him from making major withdrawals or transfers without your knowledge." I felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. "So, there's a chance I could fight this?" Carolyn gave me a reassuring smile. "Absolutely, but we'll need to gather evidence of his double life and any financial mismanagement on his part. Once we have that, we can challenge him in court. If he's the one who's been hiding things and diverting funds, the law will likely favor you." The plan was simple but powerful. We would find proof of his deception, then file to freeze our assets and protect what was rightfully mine. Carolyn gave me a list of documents to gather: bank statements, property records, anything that could show where our money had gone over the years. I returned home that night with a renewed sense of purpose. I began my search immediately, carefully going through our records, combing through old bank statements and receipts, finding every possible detail I could on our finances. The more I dug, the clearer it became that Mark had been funneling money into hidden expenses for years. I found strange transfers to an unknown account, listed under a vague business name. I realized with a sick feeling that this was likely his way of supporting his other family, hiding the expenses behind business entries. The worst part was seeing just how much he had spent. Tens of thousands of dollars over the years, all of it stolen from our shared finances to keep his other life afloat. The next day, Carolyn and I went over the findings. She was impressed, nodding as she organized the evidence. "This is exactly what we need to show that he's been taking advantage of your trust. This financial mismanagement alone would put you in a stronger position if it comes to court." But we both knew that taking him to court would come with its own risks. Mark wasn't going to let go easily. As if to confirm my fears, Mark came home that evening with a look of practiced calm, though I could sense an edge to his words. "We need to talk," he said, motioning to the living room. I braced myself as I followed him. He sat down, crossing his arms as he looked me in the eye. "Have you thought about what I said? About helping out with Lynn and the kids?" I forced myself to stay calm, to play along until I could implement Carolyn's plan. "I have," I said, carefully neutral. "But I need some time. This isn't exactly an easy thing to adjust to." He nodded. There was a glint of impatience in his eyes. "I get that. But this is what's needed, Sarah. We have a shared life, and this is part of it. I need you to be on board with this, or things are going to get messy." His words felt like a slap. The man who'd shattered my life was telling me to accept his demands as part of our shared life. He had no remorse, no regret, only a cold certainty that I would bend to his will. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Keeping my voice steady, I replied, "I understand, but you've had years to adjust to this arrangement, and I just found out. It'll take me time, and I'll need more information about everything." Mark relaxed slightly, a self-satisfied smile creeping onto his face. He thought he'd won. "That's fair. Let's take things slowly then." As he left the room, I felt the gravity of the moment settle over me. I'd given him enough to keep him complacent, to buy myself more time. I was learning just how far he was willing to go to maintain his control, and the depths of his manipulation still shocked me. But now I had a plan, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to reclaim my life. The next day, Carolyn filed the financial restraining order, and we began the process of documenting every expense and account that Mark had hidden. I was taking back control, piece by piece, building the case that would prove his betrayal in court. Mark might think he had the upper hand, but he was about to learn just how wrong he was. And I was ready for whatever came next. The following weeks were a tense waiting game. With the financial restraining order in place, Carolyn assured me that Mark wouldn't be able to access our joint assets. But every night felt like waiting for a storm to break. Mark sensed that something had changed, but he couldn't quite figure out what. He grew more irritable, watching me with a suspicion that made my skin crawl. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence, bit by bit. Every bank statement, every suspicious expense, every transfer to the unknown account, all of it painted a clear picture of his deceit. Carolyn had compiled the evidence meticulously, and she was preparing a motion to submit everything to court if needed. The case against him was solid, but Mark still had no idea what was coming. Then one evening, I came home to find Mark waiting in the living room, his face tight with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk," he said, his voice sharp. I took a breath and steadied myself, meeting his gaze. "About what?" He threw a thick envelope onto the table between us. I opened it, my stomach dropping as I recognized the contents. Copies of our joint bank statements, printouts of my recent legal transactions, and even a few emails between Carolyn and me. "I had a private investigator look into your recent activities," he said, his tone smug. "Looks like you've been a lot busier than I thought, Sarah, trying to drain our accounts behind my back." The accusation, coming from him, was laughable. I bit back my anger, keeping my tone calm. "I'm protecting myself, Mark. After everything you've hidden from me, did you really think I'd sit back and let you manipulate me into funding your double life?" He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Protecting yourself? You've been scheming to undermine me. And don't think for a second that restraining order means anything. I'll find another way to get what I need. You owe me that much." "Owe you?" I repeated, the disbelief and anger finally boiling over. "I don't owe you a thing, Mark. You've spent years lying to me, stealing from me to support a family I never knew about. And now you think I'm just going to stand by and watch you bleed me dry." He took a step closer, his face darkening. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't get it, do you? This is about my family, both of them. I've been doing what I have to do to keep everyone happy. And if you stand in the way of that, you'll regret it." I felt a flash of fear, but it quickly morphed into resolve. "You mean if I don't play along with your lies, you'll punish me? You're going to destroy me financially if I don't do what you say." He smirked. "If that's how you want to see it, fine. But think about what you're risking. If we go to court, I'll make sure you're left with next to nothing. I'll fight you for every last penny. And believe me, I'll win." I wanted to scream, to let out all the pain and betrayal I'd been carrying since this nightmare had started. But I forced myself to stay calm, even as every instinct screamed at me to retaliate. "I don't think you're in as much control as you think, Mark. You've been lying for years, and I have proof. You want to take this to court? Then let's do it." His face went pale, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He had counted on me to back down, to cave under the threat of financial ruin. But now he was realizing that his power over me was slipping. He took a step back, his expression twisting into a sneer. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah." "Maybe," I replied, feeling the strength in my voice, "but I'm done being manipulated. You might be used to controlling everything, but not anymore." With that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I was left standing in the empty house, feeling a strange mix of fear and triumph. He was angry, angrier than I'd ever seen him, but I had taken my stand, and he now knew that I wasn't going to be his pawn. The next day, Carolyn called with news. Mark's lawyer had reached out, wanting to arrange a settlement discussion. She sounded cautiously optimistic. "It could be a good sign, Sarah. If Mark's backing down, he might want to avoid a public trial, especially with the evidence we have." I knew a settlement could mean less risk for both of us, but the thought of letting him walk away from his lies felt like a betrayal of everything I'd been through. Still, Carolyn advised that we attend the discussion. "If he's open to a fair settlement, you may get what you need without further pain." I agreed, though my nerves were on edge as we prepared for the meeting. That afternoon, we arrived at the law office, the sterile conference room, filling me with a sense of dread. Mark sat on the other side of the table, his expression carefully controlled, though I could see the tension in his jaw. His lawyer, a steely woman named Beth Adams, 58F, opened the meeting with a formal nod. "We're here to discuss an equitable settlement, given the circumstances. Mark acknowledges his actions and understands the need for a financial arrangement. Carolyn, cool and composed, laid out our demands: a full financial disclosure, with a percentage of Mark's assets granted to me in compensation for the years of deception. She presented the evidence we had gathered, making it clear that if this went to trial, Mark would face significant consequences. Beth glanced at Mark, who looked visibly uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with forced calm. "Sarah, I'm willing to settle this without dragging things out. You'll get a share of the assets, and we'll go our separate ways." He made it sound generous, but I knew better. "I want full control over our primary assets, and I won't be helping you fund your other family," I said firmly. "You got yourself into this mess. It's not my responsibility to get you out of it." He clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue, clearly aware of the leverage I held. Beth nodded, clearly eager to move forward. "We can finalize these terms and avoid court if both parties agree." Carolyn turned to me, her expression encouraging. "It's a strong deal, Sarah. You'll have security and independence." As much as I wanted to see Mark face real consequences, the thought of finally being free was too tempting to ignore. I nodded, agreeing to the settlement, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough to rebuild, enough to start fresh. After signing the agreement, Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with a cold resentment. "Congratulations," he muttered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You got what you wanted." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "What I wanted was the truth, Mark, and I finally have it. You might have another family, but I have my freedom." As we left the office, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I knew there would be more healing ahead, but I had won. I had taken back control of my life from a man who thought he could deceive and manipulate me forever. Carolyn gave me a supportive smile as we walked out. "You did it, Sarah. You stood up to him and took back what was yours." I nodded, feeling a newfound strength inside me. I did, and now I get to rebuild. That evening, I walked through my house, looking at the life I'd once thought was perfect. But now I saw it as a chapter that had finally closed. Mark was no longer my husband, no longer the man I thought I loved. He was a liar, a fraud, and now just part of my past. As I stood in the quiet of my home, I knew I was ready to start over. Free from his lies, free from his control, and ready to build a life that was truly mine. I had thought signing the settlement agreement would mark the end, but as I tried to settle back into normalcy, it became clear that Mark wasn't letting go as easily as I'd hoped. He may have agreed to the financial terms in writing, but his resentment was palpable, and it wasn't long before I felt his presence linger like a shadow in the periphery of my life. One afternoon, about a week after the settlement, I received a strange text from an unknown number. "You don't know the full story." Attached was a file containing what looked like financial records and loan statements, and to my shock, they were under my name. Loans, credit lines, and even unpaid bills. I felt my stomach churn as I scanned through them, realizing Mark had apparently taken out loans in my name without my knowledge, using my personal information as collateral. I knew I needed to act fast. Carolyn immediately arranged a forensic accountant to go through every statement and loan Mark had opened under my identity. Days later, she called me into her office with news. "Sarah," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "It's worse than we thought. Mark has been accumulating debt in your name for years, hiding it within personal accounts and business expenses. He's tangled your credit into his own web of finances, and if we don't act, it could ruin your financial future." I sat in shock, barely able to process what she was saying. "But we settled. He agreed to let me walk away. How could he still have this kind of control?" Carolyn's expression softened, but she didn't hold back. "The settlement only covered the assets we knew about. This debt, since it was taken in your name, could still come back to haunt you unless we act. But we have options. We'll gather evidence of fraud, and if we can prove he forged your signature or misrepresented your consent, we could void these debts and pursue him further legally." The thought of returning to court was daunting, but I knew I had no other choice. Mark's deceit ran deeper than I'd even thought possible. He had been using me, stephening away my financial security, all while keeping me in the dark. Every time I thought I'd reached the depths of his betrayal, I discovered there was more, lurking in the shadows. I spent hours gathering every document, every email, every shred of evidence that could point to Mark's fraud. Carolyn and her team meticulously built the case, and we filed a motion to dispute the debts in my name, attaching affidavits and evidence of Mark's forged documents and fraudulent activities. Then, as if sensing I was finally escaping his hold, Mark showed up at the house one evening, his eyes dark and stormy. "You're really pushing this, aren't you?" he sneered, his voice cold. I stood my ground, feeling a rush of defiance. "I'm protecting myself from you, Mark. You've taken enough from me. This ends now." He scoffed, shaking his head with a bitter laugh. "Do you really think you'll win? Do you have any idea how messy this is going to get? You're walking into a fight you can't handle, Sarah. You'll go broke just trying to prove your innocence." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Maybe. But at least I'll know I fought for myself, for my future. I don't care how much it costs or how long it takes. I'm done letting you manipulate me." He smirked, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Fine. If that's how you want it, then let's see how far you get." The following weeks were filled with court proceedings and depositions. Carolyn presented evidence after evidence of Mark's forgery and fraud, methodically showing how he had built his financial empire by stealing my identity and creating a mountain of debt in my name. She called in expert witnesses, each testifying to the signs of forgery in his documents and the illegal loans he'd taken out. I watched Mark's face as he sat across the courtroom, his composure slipping each time Carolyn revealed another piece of his scheme. It was a slow unraveling, and I could see the cracks forming in his smug exterior. He tried to argue that I had agreed to the debt, that we had worked as a team to build our finances, but his excuses crumbled under the weight of the evidence we presented. Finally, the forensic accountant testified, showing how Mark had transferred money between accounts to create a maze of hidden debt, all in my name. By the time Carolyn gave her closing statement, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that Mark's story didn't hold up. The judge ruled in my favor, officially dismissing the debts in my name as fraud. Not only that, but Mark was ordered to cover all legal fees, with additional penalties for each instance of forgery and fraud he'd committed. It was the beginning of justice, a flicker of light at the end of a dark tunnel. Outside the courthouse, Carolyn placed a hand on my shoulder, giving me an approving nod. "You did it, Sarah. He won't be able to touch you or your finances again." But the relief I felt was tempered by the knowledge that Mark had still left a trail of destruction. The man I'd trusted had tried to ruin me, even after our marriage was over. Yet as I stood there, breathing in the crisp air, I felt a surge of resilience. I had fought for my life, for my freedom, and I'd won. Over the next few months, I rebuilt piece by piece. I closed accounts, untangled the financial mess Mark had created, and started fresh. Dan, the forensic accountant, and even a financial advisor helped me restructure my finances, giving me the stability I needed to move forward without Mark's shadow hanging over me. The scars of what I had endured remained, but they became reminders of the strength I'd found in myself. I didn't just survive Mark's betrayal, I emerged from it with a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. One evening, as I looked around my home, now truly my home, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. Mark had tried to control me, to destroy me, but I had fought back. I had taken my life back from the person who had lied and betrayed me the most. For the first time in years, I felt free. Truly, finally free. With Mark out of my life for good, I expected the transition to be seamless, like stepping into a new chapter without looking back. But in reality, the process was gradual, like waking from a bad dream and piecing together what was real. I'd spent so long feeling trapped in his web of lies that moving forward felt both liberating and daunting. After the court case wrapped up, Carolyn arranged a final debrief to discuss lingering financial details. We went over the judgment in my favor, including the clearing of debts Mark had piled in my name and the full ownership of our shared assets, which the court had ruled were rightfully mine. Carolyn reassured me that Mark's financial reach had officially ended, his every attempt to sabotage me thwarted. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of closure. Carolyn had been my steady guide, but it was finally time to walk the path alone. To truly move forward, I knew I had to reclaim my life on my terms, starting with my surroundings. I spent days clearing the house of any remnants of Mark, from his old books to the meticulously framed photos that now felt like painful lies. With every box I packed, I felt lighter. It was a shedding of a past I no longer belonged to. When the house felt like mine again, I called Maya, who brought over a small bundle of flowers and a bottle of wine to mark the occasion. "Cheers to you, Sarah," she said, her smile genuine and bright. "You've done the impossible. You took on his lies and came out stronger." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, I felt joy. The house, filled with laughter, warmth, and friends, became my safe haven, a place where I could finally breathe. Each room felt like a piece of myself coming back together, a blank canvas ready for new memories, new dreams. But rebuilding wasn't just about my home, it was about my entire life. I took on new projects at work, diving into creative challenges that helped me reconnect with a side of myself I had put on hold. My confidence grew each day as I embraced opportunities I might have once shied away from. Slowly, life took on a rhythm, one that was all mine. One afternoon, as I was organizing some files in my new home office, a letter arrived from Mark's lawyer. I froze for a moment, feeling that old pang of fear and uncertainty. But when I opened it, I realized it was simply a formal statement confirming the end of all legal matters between us. No threats, no demands, just closure. I held the letter for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in. This was it, the final, quiet ending to everything he put me through. As I filed the letter away, I realized something unexpected. I no longer felt anger. Mark had once consumed my thoughts, my energy, my happiness. But now he was a shadow from my past, a lesson in resilience and self-worth. I had taken back control, not just over my finances, but over my mind and my heart. I had freed myself from the bitterness and betrayal, and in doing so, I'd reclaimed my power. Months later, as spring bloomed, Maya and a few friends threw a small housewarming to celebrate the fresh start. We laughed, shared stories, and made plans for trips and projects, things I had put off for so long but was now ready to embrace. I realized that my life was once again full of color, laughter, and possibility. One evening, as I looked out over the garden, I felt a wave of gratitude. I was grateful for the strength I'd found within myself, for the friends who had supported me, and for the peace I'd reclaimed. The journey had been grueling, but it had led me here, to a place of true freedom. And in that moment, I knew that my life was finally mine.